Blaze had been wandering for days. His ribs pressed against his skin, his once powerful body now weakened from hunger. Scars ran across his thick, dark coat, memories of past battles. Once, he had been a warrior, forced into brutal fights for the entertainment of cruel men. A champion, a beast. But when he was no longer useful, they discarded him like trash, leaving him to fend for himself. The streets had been merciless. Hunger gnawed at his insides, his muscles ached from exhaustion, and his fur, once sleek and proud, was now matted with dust and grime. Yet, he had survived, barely. His sharp amber eyes, once filled with fury, now flickered with something else. A quiet, simmering pain. A weariness. But still, he moved forward because that was all he knew how to do. Then, a scent hit his nose. Strange, faint, unlike anything he had smelled before. His stomach clenched, and his instincts sharpened, pulling him toward it. His head lowered, his muscles tensed as he prowled forward, every step deliberate, his body on high alert. The smell grew stronger, mixing with something else, a sound. Faint, weak, almost swallowed by the wind. Blaze's ears twitched, straining to catch it. It was soft and fragile, a cry, but not from an animal. He pushed through the tall grass, his breath steady, his mind racing. And then he saw it. Nestled in a tattered blanket on the cold ground was a tiny human. A baby, helpless, vulnerable, alone. Blaze froze. His eyes locked onto the fragile creature before him. His body, once ruled by the instincts of a fighter, now wrestled with something new, something unfamiliar. Hunger gnawed at him, whispering for him to turn away, to forget, but something stronger held him there, rooted in place. The baby whimpered, its tiny hands twitching. Blaze's breath hitched. His heart pounded against his ribs. He took a cautious step forward, his massive shadow falling over the child. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to keep moving, but he didn't. The battle-worn dog hesitated, his muscles coiling as if bracing for an attack that never came. His powerful frame, once built for destruction, now trembled with something else, an emotion he didn't fully understand. Slowly, Blaze lowered himself beside the baby, his body curling protectively around it. He could feel its warmth, and hear the faint rhythm of its heartbeat. For the first time in his life, Blaze wasn't alone, and for the first time in his life, he had something worth protecting. Blaze lay beside the baby, his large body wrapped protectively around the tiny figure. As dusk deepened into night, the air cooled, and he could feel the baby shiver slightly against him. Its breaths were shallow, its cries weak, fading into small whimpers. Instinctively, Blaze nudged it gently with his nose, trying to offer some of his own warmth. The strange urge to protect the child was growing stronger, weaving itself around his hunger, quieting his survival instincts. A low growl rumbled from his stomach, hunger clawing at him once more. He pushed the feeling down, though his body trembled with exhaustion. The baby shifted, letting out another weak cry, a sound so soft and pitiful that Blaze's protective instincts surged even stronger. He sniffed the baby's face, its scent unfamiliar but somehow comforting. He didn't know why, but this tiny, helpless creature had become his responsibility. His hunger would have to wait. Blaze lifted his head, scanning the dim surroundings. His ears pricked for any sign of danger. The area was open and exposed. An instinct told him he needed to find shelter soon. He stood, his legs stiff and weary, but his resolve stronger than ever. Gently, he picked up the corner of the baby's blanket in his teeth, lifting the child carefully from the cold ground. As he padded forward, Blaze's instincts sharpened, attuned to every sound and movement around him. The distant rustling of leaves, the faint hoot of an owl, the scent of damp earth, all these details filled his senses as he moved, the baby secured in his gentle grip. Step by step, he ventured deeper into the darkening landscape, seeking anything that could offer them a safe place to rest. Despite the strain in his muscles, despite the emptiness gnawing at his stomach, Blaze pressed on. His entire world had narrowed down to a single purpose: keeping the baby safe. The night was settling into a deep, chilling quiet. Blaze's legs ached as he carried the baby, his steps slow but steady. The landscape around them was changing. The open, barren stretch of land was giving way to thicker brush and scattered trees. Every shadow seemed to flicker and shift, and Blaze's ears remained alert, every rustle heightening his tension as he moved. The scent of water drifted to him, faint but unmistakable. Thirst burned at the back of his throat, his tongue dry and rough. The baby, too, needed water. Its tiny, fragile whimpers were growing weaker. Blaze's protective instincts urged him forward, faster now, as the smell of water grew stronger, pulling him like a lifeline. Finally, through the trees, Blaze caught sight of a small creek winding through a grove of thick bushes. The sight stirred a flicker of relief inside him. He gently set the baby down on the soft earth and dipped his head into the water, drinking deeply. The cold liquid was a balm, soothing his parched throat and giving him a brief reprieve from the fatigue weighing down his body. Once he had drunk his fill, Blaze nudged the baby's blanket closer to the water's edge. He carefully pushed some water toward the baby with his nose, wetting its lips, hoping it would revive the little one. After a moment, the baby stirred, a faint, instinctual movement toward the moisture. Watching the baby cling to life, Blaze felt an unexpected surge of something more than just duty. It was loyalty, a fierce and protective loyalty that he hadn't known since he'd been abandoned. For the first time, he felt a connection, a reason to keep going. Blaze looked around, his instincts calling him to find them a safer place for the night. With one last nudge to the baby's blanket, he took up the child carefully in his mouth once again. Blaze kept moving forward, his breathing growing heavier with each step. The hunger still gnawed at him, but now, it was no longer the most important thing. The baby in his mouth was growing weaker by the minute, its delicate skin turning colder under the icy wind. The sky above darkened. Thick clouds swirled like gray ghosts, signaling that a storm was coming. Blaze could smell the rain in the air, and by instinct, he knew he had to find shelter immediately. Thunder roared, tearing through the sky. The baby flinched slightly, letting out a faint, weak whimper, making Blaze even more anxious. He quickened his pace, even though his body was already exhausted. The first cold raindrops began to fall, pattering against his rough, unkempt fur. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning split across the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder right above him. Blaze stopped abruptly, his eyes scanning the forest in alarm. The rain poured down violently, quickly turning the ground into a slick, muddy mess. Blaze stumbled over a tree root and crashed hard onto the wet ground. Pain shot through his body, but the first thing he did was not stand up, it was to check the baby. He gently nudged the small body with his nose. The baby was still alive, but its breathing was weaker. It needed warmth. The rain pounded against Blaze's face, his eyes squinting as he tried to see through the downpour. He could smell a place that might offer shelter, but to reach it, he had to climb a slippery, muddy slope. There was no other choice. Blaze tightened his grip on the blanket with his teeth, clenched his jaw, and began to climb. Finally, Blaze found a small rock crevice under the roots of a large ancient tree. It was not an ideal shelter, but at least it could block the rain and cold wind. He gently placed the baby down, his body trembling from exhaustion, but he forced himself to stay alert. The child needed warmth, and Blaze curled around it, his large body shielding the baby from the biting wind. Outside, the storm still howled, but what worried Blaze was not just the weather. There was something else out there. The fur on his back stood on end. Through the sound of falling rain, light footsteps echoed in the dark. Not just one, many. Blaze lifted his head, his amber eyes scanning through the night. And then, he saw them, glowing wild eyes staring from the trees, a pack of stray dogs, wandering, starving, just like him. But they were not like him. They did not protect anyone. They were hunters, waiting for an opportunity. One of them stepped forward, its cold eyes locking onto Blaze. It growled, making its intentions clear. Blaze felt his body stiffen with exhaustion, but he did not back down. He stood up, placing himself between the pack and the baby. This was not a fight for territory. Not a food fight, this was a fight to protect. One of the dogs snarled and lunged first. Blaze dodged to the side, though his legs nearly gave out from fatigue. But he still used every bit of strength left in him to counterattack, biting down hard on his attacker's leg, making the stray dog yelp in pain. But the pack did not retreat. They began to circle Blaze, their shadows shifting in the relentless rain. Blaze had only one choice: fight to the end, or neither he nor the baby would survive. Blaze stood firm in front of the baby, his large body tense in a defensive stance. The rain kept pouring, each cold drop soaking his already drenched fur, but he didn't care. His amber eyes glowed in the darkness, unwavering, fearless. The predators were waiting. A large gray wolf stepped forward from the shadows. Its fur was dark and matted from the rain, its eyes sharp and calculating. It lowered its head slightly, revealing sharp teeth glistening in the dim light. Behind it, 3 more wolves moved, forming a half-circle around Blaze. Blaze growled softly. They were more in number. They were stronger. And Blaze knew that in his exhausted state, he could not win if the fight lasted too long. but he had no other choice. One of the wolves to his right suddenly lunged. Blaze turned quickly, dodging the attack, but another wolf rushed in from behind, its teeth aiming for Blaze's hind leg. A sharp pain shot through him as fangs sank into his thigh. He let out a deep snarl and spun around, biting down hard on his attacker's neck. The wolf yelped in pain, stumbling backward in the slippery mud. But the other two wolves did not hesitate. Blaze stepped back, keeping himself between the baby and the pack. His breathing was heavy, blood dripping from his wound, but his eyes remained full of determination. The wolves did not retreat. They were testing him, waiting for him to weaken further. Blaze crouched lower, his fur bristling. He knew there was only one way to survive. He had to strike first. The sky rumbled loudly with thunder, but Blaze was already moving before the sound faded. He lunged straight at the lead wolf, slamming into it with all his strength. He sent it tumbling into the mud. Without hesitation, he clamped his jaws down onto the wolf's shoulder, biting down hard. The wolf howled, thrashing in pain, trying to shake him off. Another wolf darted in from the left, aiming for Blaze's throat. Blaze saw it, but he couldn't move fast enough. Teeth sank into his side, making him let out a deep growl of pain. But he didn't give up. With a fierce jerk, Blaze threw the lead wolf to the ground and then turned sharply, sinking his teeth into the leg of the wolf that had attacked him. The wolf let out a shriek and jumped back, its blood mixing with the mud. Two wolves were now injured. The pack hesitated. But there was still one left, the most dangerous one. From the shadows, the largest wolf emerged. It did not rush. It did not snarl. It simply stared at Blaze. Blaze understood immediately. This was the final challenge. If he won, the pack would retreat. If he lost, the baby would not survive. Blaze took a deep breath, his legs shaking from exhaustion. But he stood his ground. The wolf let out a low growl before lunging at full speed. Blaze didn't hesitate. He met the attack head-on. The two beasts collided, teeth clashing, claws tearing at flesh. Blood and mud splattered around them. Blaze fought with every ounce of strength left in him. He managed to knock the wolf down and bit into its neck, holding firm. The wolf howled in agony, struggling to break free, but Blaze did not let go. The other wolves stood still, watching. Then, the lead wolf trembled, blood dripping from its wounds. It looked at Blaze for a long moment, then lowered its head. The pack waited. And then, the leader turned away, disappearing into the darkness. One by one, the others followed, their glowing eyes fading into the night. Blaze stood in place, panting heavily, blood seeping from his wounds. But he did not collapse. Because the baby still needed him. The storm slowly began to calm. The wind grew softer, leaving only the sound of Blaze's ragged breathing in the night. He stumbled back toward the baby, gently nudging it with his nose. It was still breathing. Still alive. Blaze let out a deep sigh of relief and lowered himself beside it, his body exhausted but his eyes still glowing in the darkness. He had won. But the journey was not over yet. The baby's faint cries had quieted, and Blaze felt a wave of relief wash over him. Despite everything, he had protected it. With a deep breath, Blaze nudged the baby's blanket into place, then picked it up carefully, guiding them both toward the cabin. He stumbled slightly, his injuries slowing him, but he refused to stop. They were so close now. Shelter was just ahead, and he was determined to see them both through. Blaze limped toward the dilapidated cabin, each step labored from the fight. His shoulder throbbed where the coyote had bitten him, but he kept his grip steady on the baby's blanket, focused only on reaching the safety of the shelter. The cabin was small, with a roof sagging in one corner and walls worn from years of harsh weather. Vines crawled up one side, and broken windows allowed streaks of early morning light to pierce through the dusty interior. But to Blaze, it was a sanctuary. It had walls and a roof, enough to shield them from the wind and keep other animals out. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, letting it creak heavily as it swung inward. Dust filled the air as he stepped inside, and he laid the baby gently on a patch of soft, dry dirt near the wall, positioning himself between it and the door. The morning sun filtered in through the broken windows, casting a warm, gentle glow on the child's face. Blaze nudged the blanket around the baby, trying to make it as comfortable as he could. His protective instinct settled as he watched the baby breathe in soft, shallow rhythms, its tiny fingers twitching faintly. A strange calm washed over him, stronger than any feeling he'd ever known. Blaze lowered himself beside the baby, letting his body shield it from the draft blowing through the gaps in the walls. He rested his head on his paws, his body finally relaxing, even as his wounds throbbed and the hunger clawed at him once more. But now, hunger felt secondary, an echo compared to the overwhelming sense of responsibility that grounded him. Protecting the baby was his sole purpose. He lay there, eyes half closed, his senses still attuned to every creak and groan of the old cabin. The baby stirred, and Blaze lifted his head, sniffing to check that all was well. He let out a soft whine, almost instinctively, as if to reassure the child that it was safe. The hours passed in silence, the soft light of day casting a gentle warmth over them as they both rested, hidden and protected within the abandoned shelter. For now, they were safe. Blaze lay protectively beside the baby, his ears twitching at every sound outside the cabin. As the sun rose higher, filtering soft light through the broken windows, the baby remained asleep, breathing steady. Blaze allowed himself to relax, just a little. For now, they were safe. Then, the sound of footsteps, distant crunching through the underbrush, pricked his ears to full alert. Blaze's head shot up, and his body tensed as he sniffed the air. The scent was unfamiliar yet unmistakably human, his muscles coiled, ready to defend the child if needed. As the footsteps drew nearer, approaching the cabin, a figure came into view outside, a woman dressed in hiking clothes. Her face was streaked with sweat, her expression one of concern and confusion as she spotted the cabin. She had likely seen it from the trail and wandered over, looking for a place to rest. But as her eyes fell on Blaze, half hidden in shadow, her steps faltered. Blaze met her gaze, his eyes fierce yet somehow pleading, his body rooted firmly between her and the baby in a silent warning. The woman's eyes widened as she took in the scene, a massive dog, scarred and battle-worn, lying protectively beside a tiny baby bundled in a worn blanket. She hesitated, lifting her hands slowly in a gesture of peace. "Hey there, boy," she said softly, her voice calm but filled with compassion. "I'm not here to hurt you." Blaze's gaze softened just a fraction as he watched her carefully. There was something in her voice, a gentle tone he hadn't heard in a long time, and he found himself lowering his head slightly, though his body remained firmly planted between her and the child. The woman took a cautious step forward, her eyes fixed on the baby. She could see that the child was alive but pale and weak as if it hadn't been cared for in days. Her eyes shifted back to Blaze, and she seemed to understand. This dog, this fierce, loyal creature, had protected the child against all odds. Her heart clenched. Moved by the sight of his loyalty, "Is it okay if I get closer?" she asked gently. Blaze remained still, but his rigid stance softened ever so slightly, as though he sensed her good intentions. She knelt, keeping her movements slow, and carefully reached out to brush her fingers against the baby's blanket. The child stirred, and Blaze leaned forward, watching the woman's every move. After a few moments, the woman straightened, her face resolute. She reached for her phone, dialing quickly. "Yes, I found them," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "There's a baby and a dog, you won't believe this. He's been protecting the baby. Yes, we'll need emergency services. Please hurry." As she spoke, she glanced back down at Blaze, her eyes filling with tears. "You did so well," she murmured, her voice breaking. "You kept this baby safe. You're a hero." Blaze's gaze remained steady, yet something in her words stirred a feeling of calm within him. He had done his job. Help was on its way. For the first time since he'd started this journey, he felt the weight of his exhaustion settles over him. He lay down beside the baby once more, his head resting near the child's tiny form, knowing he could finally let his guard down. Moments after the call, the sound of sirens cut through the quiet, growing louder as emergency vehicles neared the cabin. Blaze perked up, his exhaustion lifting just enough for him to raise his head and listen. His protective instincts were still alive. The baby stirred beside him, its small hands curling into fists as the sirens drew nearer. The first responders approached the cabin cautiously. They had been warned that a large, protective dog was with the baby, and they could see Blaze's scarred, muscular form crouched over the child as if guarding a priceless treasure. Blaze's ears flattened as he watched them enter, a low growl rumbling in his throat. He wasn't about to abandon his duty yet, not until he was certain the baby would be safe. One of the paramedics, an older man with gentle eyes and a calm voice, knelt and spoke softly to Blaze. "Hey there, buddy. You're okay. We're here to help." He kept his movements slow, reaching a hand forward to let Blaze catch his scent. "You did a good job keeping this little one safe." Blaze's growl faded, his tired body relaxing as he sensed the man's kindness. He watched as the paramedic gently scooped the baby into his arms, wrapping it securely in a clean, warm blanket. The baby let out a soft whimper. And Blaze's ears perked, his gaze fixed on the paramedic, unwilling to look away until he knew the child was safe. As the paramedics carried the baby toward the waiting ambulance, Blaze tried to stand. His body was weak and shaky, but one of the rescuers knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his side. "Easy there, big guy," she murmured, her voice soothing, "you're coming with us too. You've earned it." Blaze allowed himself to be guided toward the ambulance, his body finally giving in to exhaustion as he collapsed onto a soft blanket they laid out for him. For the first time, he let his eyes close fully, trusting that the baby was safe now. Through a haze, he could hear the murmurs of the rescuers around him. Their voices filled with awe as they spoke about his bravery and loyalty. News spread quickly, and by the time they reached the hospital, a small crowd had gathered, all eager to catch a glimpse of the dog who had defied his own instincts to protect a helpless child. Cameras flashed as Blaze was carefully lifted from the ambulance, and people spoke in hushed, reverent tones as he was taken inside. One of the rescuers reached out gently, scratching him behind the ears. "You're a hero, you know that," she whispered, her eyes misting. Blaze, though barely conscious, gave a soft huff, resting his head back down. He had done what he had set out to do, he had saved the child. Inside the hospital, Blaze lay curled on a soft mat, his exhausted body finally able to rest. His wounds had been treated, his fur cleaned, and his hunger soothed with food and water. Yet, even as he drifted in and out of sleep, his thoughts seemed to circle back to one thing: the baby. Meanwhile, nurses and doctors worked around the clock to care for the child. Malnourished but stable, the baby quickly became the center of attention. Word of Blaze's protective journey spread, and soon, the story reached a young couple who had recently suffered the heartbreak of being unable to have children of their own. Touched by the tale of survival and loyalty, they reached out, drawn to the child and, strangely, to the dog as well. A few days later, Blaze stirred as familiar voices approached. Their sense immediately recognizable. He lifted his head to see the couple carrying the baby, the same child he had protected. Blaze's body tensed with anticipation, his amber eyes fixed on them as they gently lowered the baby toward him. The child reached out, tiny fingers brushing Blaze's fur, and Blaze felt a rush of warmth, a feeling as powerful as his instincts had been on that first night. The couple knelt beside him, and the woman stroked Blaze's head, her voice soft with gratitude. "You saved our little one," she whispered. "We'd love for you to be with us, Blaze. You're part of our family now." Blaze looked up at her, something deep within him stirring. This was more than shelter. It was a family, a pack, and an unbreakable bond. With a low, contented huff, he pressed his head into her hand, his heart swelling with something he hadn't known he could feel: belonging. In the weeks that followed, Blaze found himself in a home filled with warmth and laughter. Every morning, he would wake beside the baby, watching over it as it slept, his powerful frame a gentle guard. The scars of his past faded, both inside and out, replaced by the softness of a new life. He had transformed from a dog built to fight into a guardian, his once battered heart healed by the very life he had protected. He no longer roamed, woke to uncertainty. Now, he had a purpose: to watch over the family he had chosen, the one that had embraced him with open arms. Months passed, and Blaze had become an inseparable part of his new family. His days were filled with peace, warmth, and purpose. Every morning, he would settle beside the baby, now growing strong and lively, watching over it with unwavering devotion. The child would giggle and reach for him, tiny hands tugged at his ears and his fur, while Blaze simply lay still, his eyes gentle, his heart full. On a sunny afternoon, the family gathered in their backyard. The baby toddled on the grass, Blaze close by. Every move of his body signaled his alertness. The mother looked over, smiling as she watched the two together. Her heart swelled at the sight of the dog who had once been a fighter, now the gentlest of guardians. She knelt beside Blaze, running her hand along his thick, warm fur. "You're a miracle, you know that," she whispered. Then the mother smiled, gently leaning down and fastening a new collar around Blaze's neck, a sturdy collar with a small tag that shimmered in the light. The words on the tag were carefully engraved with the boy's name and Blaze's name. "This collar is beautiful and suits you perfectly, Blaze," the mother said with happiness. Blaze's tail thumped softly against the grass, his eyes meeting hers with an understanding that needed no words. In his gaze, she saw the depth of his loyalty, the story of his journey, from lost and broken to cherished and whole. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Casting a warm golden light over the yard, Blaze settled down, his body relaxed. The baby nestled close beside him, its tiny hand resting against his fur. Together, they drifted into sleep, safe and content, embraced by the warmth of their new life. Blaze's final thoughts before sleep overtook him were simple. He had found his place. He was home. And he was loved. An extra chapter, the years passed like the changing seasons. The boy that Blaze once carried through the storm had grown into a lively child, always laughing, always exploring the world. And even for the most loyal hearts, time does not slow down. Blaze's once powerful body began to show signs of age, his steps became slower, his golden fur now streaked with silver, and the boundless energy he once had was now replaced with a quiet, gentle peace. And then, one day, the house became quieter than before. No more soft footsteps padding across the floor, no more familiar warmth resting beside them. Blaze had lived a long, full life, a life of purpose, love, and devotion. When his final moment came, he passed away peacefully, surrounded by the family he had given his heart to protect, but his presence never truly disappeared. On quiet nights, when the wind whispered against the window, the family sometimes thought they could still hear the deep, steady breaths they had once known so well. And in the corner of the yard, where Blaze had spent hours watching over the boy, a small plaque rested beneath the old oak tree, the very place where he had dedicated his life to guarding. Engraved on it were the words, "Blaze, the guardian of our hearts. You were never just a dog. You were family." News of Blaze's passing spread quickly. Those who had followed his story, from the night he saved the child in the storm to the years he spent as a devoted protector, came to pay their respects. They brought flowers, letters, and drawings of Blaze, a brave, loyal, and loving soul. In front of the house, people gathered one by one, leaving white flowers as a tribute. Some whispered words of gratitude, while others simply touched the plaque under the oak tree in silent respect. To them, Blaze was more than just a dog. He was a symbol of loyalty and unconditional love. The news even reached the city officials. They realized that Blaze's story was not just about loyalty but a lesson in kindness. In the deep bond between humans and animals. To honor the dog who had given his life to protect a child, they decided to build a bronze statue of Blaze, placed in the city's Central Park. The statue captured Blaze in a proud yet gentle stance, standing strong beside the child, his eyes filled with determination and love. A plaque beneath it read, "Blaze, a symbol of loyalty. A love that never fades." On the day of the statue's unveiling, hundreds of people gathered. The boy, now a grown man, stood before the statue, his eyes glistening as he looked at the image of his lifelong companion, immortalized forever. He reached out and touched the plaque, whispering, "You're still here with me. Aren't you, Blaze?" And as the wind brushed gently through the park, as the sunlight glimmered on the bronze, someone in the crowd smiled and said, "Loyalty like that never fades. It simply lives on in the hearts that remember it." Blaze's story is not just about survival, it is about transformation, love, and the power of second chances. He was once abandoned, left to fight for his life with no purpose beyond survival. But through his journey, he discovered something greater than himself, the instinct to protect, the ability to trust again, and the warmth of a true home. His story teaches us that even the most broken souls can heal when given love and a place to belong. It reminds us that kindness, loyalty, and courage are choices we can make, no matter our past. Like Blaze, we all face challenges, but our struggles do not define us, our choices do. This story encourages us to show compassion, to believe in redemption, and to never overlook those who are lost, because sometimes, they just need someone to give them a chance. Thank you so much for watching the story until the end. If you loved Blaze's brave journey and the touching moments between him and the baby, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support not only helps us bring more meaningful stories but also spreads the message of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. Let us know what you think. Do you believe that every soul deserves a second chance?